Alcohol. I've spent whole summers at Neufville alone except for a drink. People used to come on the weekends, but during the week I was alone in that huge house, and that was how alcohol took on its full significance. It lends resonance to loneliness and ends up making you prefer it to everything else. Drinking isn't necessarily the same as wanting to die, but you can't drink without thinking you're killing yourself. Living with alcohol is living with death close at hand. What stops you killing yourself when you're intoxicated out of your mind is the thought that once you're dead, you won't be able to drink anymore. I started drinking at parties and political meetings, glasses of wine at first, then whiskey. And then when I was 41, I met someone who really loved alcohol and drank every day, though sensibly. I soon outstripped him. That went on for 10 years until I got cirrhosis of the liver and started vomiting blood. Then I gave up drinking for 10 years. That was the first time. Then I started again and gave it up again. I forget why. Then I stopped smoking, but I could only do that by drinking again. This is the third time I've given it up. I've never smoked opium or hash. I dope myself with aspirin every day for 15 years, but I've never taken drugs. At first I've drank whiskey and Calvados, what I call the pale kinds of alcohol, and beer and vervain from Valais. They say that's the worst for the liver. Lastly, I started to drink wine, and I never stopped. I became an alcoholic as soon as I started to drink. I drank like one straight away and left everyone else behind. I began by drinking in the evening, then at midday, then in the morning, and then I began to drink at night. First once a night, then every 2 hours. I've never drugged myself any other way. I've always known that if I took heroin, it would soon get out of control. I've always drunk with men. Alcohol is linked to the memory of sexual violence. It makes it glow. It's inseparable from it, but only in the mind. Alcohol is a substitute for pleasure, though it doesn't replace it. People obsessed with sex aren't usually alcoholics. Alcoholics, even those in the gutter, tend to be intellectuals. Proletariat, a class far more intellectual now than the bourgeoisie, has a propensity for alcohol, as can be seen all over the world. Of all human occupations, manual work is probably the kind that leads most directly to thought, and therefore to drink. Just look at the history of ideas. Alcohol makes people talk. It's spirituality carried to the point where logic becomes lunacy. It's reason going mad trying to understand why this kind of society, this reign of injustice, exists, and it always ends in despair. A drunk is often coarse but rarely obscene. Sometimes he loses his temper and kills. When you've had too much to drink, you're back at the start of the infernal cycle of life. People talk about happiness and say it's impossible, but they know what the word means. What they lack is a God. The void you discover one day in your teens, nothing can ever undo that discovery. But alcohol was invented to help us bear the void in the universe, the motion of the planets, their imperturbable wheeling through space, their silent indifference to the place of our pain. A man who drinks is interplanetary. He moves through interstellar space. It's from there he looks down. Alcohol doesn't console, it doesn't fill up anyone's psychological gaps. All it replaces is the lack of God. It doesn't comfort man. On the contrary, it encourages him in his folly. It transports him to the supreme regions where he is master of his own destiny. No other human being, no woman, no poem or music, book or painting can replace alcohol in its power to give man the illusion of real creation. Alcohol's job is to replace creation. And that's what it does do for a lot of people who ought to have believed in God and don't anymore. But alcohol is barren. The words a man speaks in the night of drunkenness fade like darkness itself at the coming of day. Drunkenness doesn't create anything. It doesn't enter into the words. It dims and slackens the mind instead of stimulating it. I've spoken under its influence. The illusion's perfect. You're sure what you're saying has never been said before, but alcohol can't produce anything that lasts. It's just wind. I've written under its influence too. I had the knack of keeping tipsiness at bay, probably because I have such a horror of it. I never drank in order to get drunk. I never drank fast. I drank all the time and I was never drunk. I was withdrawn from the world. inaccessible but not intoxicated. When a woman drinks, it's as if an animal were drinking, or a child. Alcoholism is scandalous in a woman, and a female alcoholic is rare, a serious matter. It's a slur on the divine in our nature. I realized the scandal I was causing around me, but in my day, in order to have the strength to confront it publicly, for example, to go into a bar on one's own at night, you needed to have had something to drink already. It's always too late when people tell someone they drink too much. You drink too much. But it's a shocking thing to say whenever you say it. You never know yourself that you're an alcoholic. In 100% of cases, it's taken as an insult. The person concerned says, "You're only saying that to get at me." In my own case, the disease had already taken hold by the time I was told about it. We live in a world paralyzed with principles. We just let other people die. I don't think this kind of thing happens with drugs. Drugs cut the addict off completely from the rest of humanity, but they don't throw him to the winds or into the street. They don't turn him into a vagabond. But alcohol means the gutter, the doss house, other alcoholics. With drugs, it's very quick. Death comes fast. Speechlessness, darkness, closed shutters, helplessness, nor is there any consolation for stopping drinking. Since I've stopped, I feel for the alcoholic I once was. I really did drink a lot. Then help came. But now I'm telling my own story instead of talking about alcohol in general. It's incredibly simple. For real alcoholics, there's probably the simplest possible explanation. They're in a place where suffering can't hurt them. Clocards aren't unhappy. It's silly to say that when they're drunk from morn till night, 24 hours a day. They couldn't lead the life they lead anywhere else but in the street. During the winter of 1986, they preferred to risk dying of cold rather than go into a hostel and give up their liter of rouge. Everyone tried to work out why they wouldn't go into the doss house. That was the reason. The night hours aren't the worst, but of course that's the most dangerous time if you suffer from insomnia. You mustn't have a drop of alcohol in the house. I'm one of those alcoholics who can be set off again by drinking just one glass of wine. I don't know the medical term for it. An alcoholic's body is like a telephone exchange, like a set of different compartments all linked together. It's the brain that's affected first. The mind. First comes happiness through the mind, then through the body. It's lapped around, saturated, then borne along. Yes, that's the word for it, borne along. And after a time you have the choice whether to keep drinking until you're senseless and lose your identity, or to go no further than the beginnings of happiness, to die, so to speak, every day, or to go on living.